There is a specific, particular kind of silence you have noticed lately in someone you love, one that carries weight rather than emptiness, a pause right before they finish a sentence, a glance that lingers a moment longer than it used to, a phone picked up and set back down without a single word typed, and I want you to know tonight that you have not been imagining any of it. I know exactly what that silence has been carrying, and I know exactly how much longer it has left before it finally speaks, closer than you currently believe. Each time you replay it, some new small detail seems to shift meaning entirely, one moment suggesting concern and the very next suggesting reassurance, leaving you no closer to actual certainty than when you started. You have gone over the same handful of small moments so many times that they have started to blur together, each replay adding another layer of uncertainty rather than the clarity you were actually hoping to find. You have replayed small moments in your mind more than once, wondering whether something has shifted, wondering whether you are simply tired and reading meaning into nothing, wondering whether asking directly would only make an already fragile moment feel more fragile still. You have decided, for now, to simply wait and watch, carrying a quiet unease you have not fully explained even to yourself. Have you ever sensed someone circling around a truth they were not yet ready to say out loud, close enough that you could almost feel the shape of it without ever hearing the actual words? I did not come to you tonight to tell you that unease was foolish. I came to tell you something you do not know yet. Someone you love is about to reveal a secret, and when it finally comes, it will not break what you share. It will change it completely, and it will change it for good. You have not been imagining the silence. You have been sensing something true finally gathering the courage it needs to become spoken. Stay with me tonight, because what I am about to show you will change the way you understand every unfinished pause you have noticed in someone you love. You have carried this quiet watching for longer than you have told anyone, studying small details in a relationship that matters deeply to you, trying to translate silence into meaning without ever having the actual word spoken clearly enough to know for certain. There is a particular, quiet exhaustion in loving someone while sensing they are holding something back, watching them carefully for clues, studying their tone, their timing, the exact moment they change the subject, without ever fully naming to yourself what you are actually searching for. This kind of watchfulness rarely feels like a choice. It feels more like an instinct that switched on the moment you first sensed something shifting, and has not fully switched off since. There is a very specific exhaustion in becoming fluent in someone else's unspoken signals, learning their patterns so closely that you can sense a shift before you can name it, carrying the weight of that constant, careful attention without anyone else around you fully understanding why you seem quieter or more watchful than usual lately. You have learned to read the smallest signals in this relationship, a longer pause before a reply, a subject change just slightly too quickly, a warmth that flickers and then carefully composes itself again. You have wondered whether naming what you sense out loud would help, or whether it would simply frighten away whatever fragile thing is still forming. Do you know the exact night you first noticed this particular silence begin, the specific moment something in the rhythm between you quietly shifted? You have noticed this exhaustion most clearly in the quiet moments right before sleep, replaying the day's small interactions, searching for any detail you may have missed that would finally clarify what has been forming in the silence, wishing sleep would simply arrive and quiet the searching for a few hours. There is an exhaustion in loving someone through an unspoken season like this one, showing up fully and faithfully while carrying a question you have not yet found the safety to ask directly. Some of those rehearsed conversations start gently and calmly, and others start with a sharper edge born from exhaustion, and I want you to know neither version disqualifies you from the compassion available to you tonight. You have caught yourself rehearsing how you might eventually bring it up, drafting and discarding entire conversations in your own mind that you have never actually attempted out loud. This fear often intensifies the longer the silence continues, each additional day making the eventual conversation feel more significant, more loaded, more difficult to finally initiate than it likely needs to be. Some of you carry a private fear that naming the silence out loud will somehow make it more real, more permanent, more likely to end in something painful rather than something good, so you have chosen instead to simply wait, watch, and hope. Some of those fragments have sounded more like frustration than faith, and I want you to know I have received every single one of them exactly the same, without ever needing you to arrive at me with polished, composed language first. You have brought this exact worry to me in fragments, a half-formed prayer whispered while driving, a fuller one spoken quietly before falling asleep, each one carrying the same underlying question you have not yet felt brave enough to ask out loud to the person actually holding the answer. You have prayed about this specific unease more times than you have told anyone, sometimes asking me directly what is being carried by the person you love, sometimes simply asking for peace enough to keep waiting without it hollowing you out completely. I see the version that manages to laugh genuinely at dinner despite carrying this unresolved question quietly underneath the conversation, and I see the version that finally lets the mask down once the house has gone fully quiet. I see every version of you that this waiting has produced, the one that laughs easily in front of others and the one that quietly checks their phone one more time before sleep, hoping tonight might finally be the night the silence breaks. I see the version of you that shows up warm and steady despite this quiet unease, and the version that lies awake wondering what exactly is forming in the silence, and I want you to know both versions are equally known to me, equally loved by me, neither one required to have this fully figured out before you come to me honestly about it. I have watched that careful attention for a long time now, aware of exactly how much quiet effort it actually requires, and I want you to know it has never once gone unnoticed by me, even during the weeks it felt entirely invisible to everyone else around you. There is a particular, deeply human tenderness in how carefully you have been paying attention, noticing details most people would miss entirely, caring enough about this relationship to track its smallest shifts even when doing so has cost you real peace of mind. You are not foolish for noticing. You are not imagining a shift that is not really there. You are simply someone who has not yet been shown what that silence is actually preparing to become. When silence like this stretches on, it becomes tempting to take matters into your own hands rather than trust that the right truth will eventually be spoken honestly and in its own time. There is a man in Scripture who did exactly this, forcing a truth into existence through deception rather than waiting for it to arrive honestly. Jacob wanted his father's blessing, the one that belonged by custom to his older brother Esau, and rather than trusting that I already had a plan for him, he disguised himself, covering his smooth skin with animal hide to mimic his brother's hairy arms, and lied directly to his blind father's face in order to steal what he was afraid would never honestly come to him. The blessing Jacob obtained through that deception was real, but the cost of obtaining it dishonestly followed him for years afterward, a brother's fury he had to flee from, a family fractured by a truth built on disguise rather than honesty, decades of consequences that trailed behind one desperate, deceptive night. Have you ever tried to force a truth into existence before its time, growing so tired of waiting honestly that manipulation or manufactured urgency started to feel like the only remaining option? Some of you have done a quieter version of exactly what Jacob did, pushing for answers before someone was ready to give them honestly, testing, prodding, creating small emotional pressures meant to force a reveal that was never going to feel safe or real if it was rushed into being that way. Consider how understandable Jacob's desperation actually was. watching a blessing he believed belonged to him slip further away with each passing day. His father remained undecided, the waiting itself becoming unbearable enough that deception started to feel like the only remaining path forward. His mother Rebecca encouraged the scheme, and together they moved quickly, driven by a shared fear that waiting honestly might mean losing the blessing entirely, never considering that the God who had already promised Jacob this exact inheritance before he was even born had no actual need for their desperate intervention. You may be carrying a similar unnecessary urgency right now, convinced that something good will slip away if you do not intervene, when the truth already forming in someone you love may already be fully secured, simply waiting for its own honest timing rather than requiring your intervention at all. This detail matters enormously. The promise Jacob was so desperately trying to secure through deception had already been spoken over him honestly, long before he ever needed to disguise himself to obtain it. His entire scheme was built on a fear that the truth would not arrive on its own, a fear that turned out to be completely unnecessary. None of this makes you manipulative beyond repair. It makes you human, exhausted the same way Jacob was exhausted, tempted to grab by force what waiting honestly has not yet delivered. I did not abandon Jacob because of that deception, but I also did not let him escape the consequences of forcing what should have unfolded honestly. I am not asking you to force this particular silence into speaking before it is ready. I am asking you to trust that the truth being formed in the person you love is worth receiving honestly, even if that means continuing to wait a while longer than you would prefer. I want you to hear something important underneath this warning. Whatever impatience you feel toward this unspoken silence, I am not asking you to pretend that impatience away. I am simply inviting you to release your grip on forcing it, trusting that an honestly revealed truth will always be more valuable than one you had to manipulate or manufacture into existence before its time. There is a story in Scripture about a secret revealed in a single overwhelming moment, and it is the clearest picture I can give you tonight of what is quietly forming in the silence you have been noticing. Joseph had been sold into slavery by his own brothers decades earlier, and through an extraordinary sequence of circumstances, had risen to become the most powerful official in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. When famine struck the region, his brothers traveled to Egypt seeking grain, standing before him without any idea that the powerful Egyptian official deciding their fate was the very brother they had betrayed and sold away so many years before. Joseph recognized them immediately, but he did not reveal himself right away. He tested them, watched them, waited through multiple encounters, allowing enough time to see whether they had genuinely changed, before the moment finally arrived that Scripture describes with startling emotional detail. Joseph could no longer control himself in front of all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence," and no one else stood with him while he made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians and Pharaoh's household heard it. Have you ever witnessed someone hold back an enormous truth for exactly as long as it took to be certain the moment and the people receiving it were finally, genuinely ready? Consider what those years of silence must have cost Joseph personally, carrying the full knowledge of who his brothers actually were while they remained completely unaware, watching them daily, testing them carefully, holding an enormous truth inside himself while waiting for exactly the right moment to finally let it go. There were multiple encounters before the actual reveal, Joseph accusing them of being spies, demanding they bring their youngest brother, watching them wrestle with guilt over what they had done to him decades earlier without ever suspecting the very man testing them was the brother whose absence still haunted their own father. Judah, the very brother who had once suggested selling Joseph into slavery, eventually offered himself as a substitute prisoner rather than allow their youngest brother to remain in Egypt, a transformation Joseph witnessed firsthand, real evidence that these were no longer the same men who had once thrown him into a pit without a second thought. That single act of sacrifice from Judah was likely the final confirmation Joseph needed, real proof that enough time and enough genuine change had occurred that the truth could finally be spoken safely, without fear of it being met with the same cruelty that had once sent him into slavery in the first place. When Joseph finally spoke, his brothers were terrified, unable even to answer him, certain in that moment that revenge was coming for what they had done to him decades earlier. Joseph's actual words undid every fear they carried into that room. He told them plainly, "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because it was to save lives that I was sent ahead of you. This is what I want you to receive about your own unspoken silence tonight. The secret being carried by the person you love has not been withheld out of coldness or coming harm, the same way Joseph's silence before his reveal was never coldness, but timing, and courage gathering itself for a moment that needed to be exactly right in order to be fully received." He kissed each of his brothers and wept over them, finally releasing years of carefully controlled emotion now that the truth had been fully spoken and fully received without the retaliation they had spent the entire conversation quietly bracing themselves for. Joseph told them plainly to hurry back and bring their father, promising to provide for the entire family through 5 more years of famine still to come, transforming what could have remained a story of betrayal into one of provision large enough to sustain generations. Joseph's brothers walked into that room bracing for punishment and walked out reconciled, provided for, and reunited with a brother they believed they had lost forever. The reveal you have been sensing coming may carry exactly this same shape, a truth you have been quietly bracing yourself against that, once spoken, does not tear your relationship apart but restores it more completely than you currently believe is possible. Let me show you what this looks like in a life closer to yours than an ancient Egyptian palace ever could. There was a woman named Yolanda, generally confident and steady in most areas of her life, who noticed, over several quiet weeks, that her husband had grown unusually distant, distracted during dinner, quieter than usual in the evenings, occasionally catching himself mid-sentence and simply trailing off instead of finishing whatever thought had risen in him. She had begun quietly researching worst-case scenarios during her own quiet moments, unable to stop her mind from constructing entire painful stories out of nothing more concrete than a few distracted dinners and 1 or 2 unfinished sentences. She assumed the worst in private, turning over every painful possibility late at night while he slept beside her, unaware of the fear slowly building in her chest. He had thought carefully about how to begin, wanting to explain the full picture before she could arrive at her own worst conclusion, aware from small comments she had made recently that she had already been sensing something was different. He genuinely worried, right up until the moment he actually spoke, that no amount of careful wording would fully prepare her for whatever she assumed was coming. He had chosen that particular evening carefully, waiting until the children were occupied and the house had settled into its usual quiet rhythm, wanting her full attention rather than trying to explain something this significant in a rushed, distracted moment. He had rehearsed the conversation so many times in his own mind that when the actual moment finally arrived, the words came out slightly jumbled, needing to start over twice before he could get through the explanation clearly. On an ordinary Tuesday evening, entirely unremarkable by every outward measure, after weeks of this growing unease, her husband finally sat her down, visibly nervous, hands shaking slightly as he began to speak. He had been offered a significant promotion months earlier, one that would require relocating their entire family to a different state, and he had been quietly wrestling for weeks with how to even begin telling her, afraid of her reaction, afraid of uprooting the life she loved, afraid of disappointing her either way the conversation went. She later admitted she had nearly convinced herself their marriage was quietly ending, constructing an entire narrative around evidence that, once explained, turned out to mean something completely different than what her anxious mind had assembled it into. Yolanda had spent weeks bracing herself for something far worse than a career opportunity, having quietly prepared herself for words that never actually came, and the relief that flooded through her once she finally understood what the silence had actually been carrying was immediate and overwhelming. The specific fear she had been carrying, the quiet dread that had shaped nearly every interaction between them for weeks, dissolved almost instantly once she finally understood what had actually been forming in the silence. What she had feared was the end of something turned out, once finally spoken honestly, to be the careful, nervous beginning of something neither of them had expected but both of them, once they finally talked it through together, genuinely wanted. I am not telling you this story to promise you a specific Tuesday evening or a specific career opportunity. I am telling you this so you understand that the silence you have been sensing in someone you love may be carrying something entirely different than the fear your own mind has been quietly constructing around it, the same way Yolanda's fear constructed an ending where a beginning was actually waiting all along. Do you remember the specific pause you noticed at the beginning of this, the silence you have been carefully watching without ever fully naming what you were watching for? I want you to hear this now with the full weight it deserves. Someone you love is about to reveal a secret, the same way Joseph finally revealed himself to brothers who walked in bracing for punishment and walked out fully restored, the same way Yolanda's husband finally spoke a truth that turned out to be far gentler than the fear she had spent weeks quietly carrying. Read that again if you need to. You have spent so long bracing yourself for the worst version of whatever this silence is carrying, assuming the reveal, when it finally comes, will confirm your deepest fear rather than release you from it. That was never guaranteed to be true. Joseph's brothers assumed the same thing walking into that room, and what actually waited for them was reconciliation far greater than the fear they carried in with them. This is the sentence I want you to carry with you when you leave this moment tonight. What is being carried in that silence was never meant to break what you share. It was gathering itself to change it, completely, and to change it for good, the same way one overwhelming, honest reveal once turned an entire family's fear into restoration that lasted for generations. Let me pray this over you now, the way I have already been praying it over you long before tonight. Heavenly Father, I bring before you the one reading these words right now, carrying a quiet unease about someone they love, sensing a silence that has not yet found the courage to become spoken. Give them wisdom to see this waiting the way Joseph's brothers eventually understood their own reunion, not a fear finally confirmed, but a truth finally, mercifully revealed in its own perfect time. Give them the discernment to distinguish between passive avoidance and genuine patience, understanding that healthy waiting still involves real presence and continued warmth rather than simply enduring silence and hoping it eventually resolves itself. Teach them that patience in this specific waiting is not passivity, but active trust, choosing to believe that an honest truth arriving in its own time will always outweigh a rushed answer forced into existence before either heart was actually ready. Give them the patience Joseph modeled, waiting until the moment and the people receiving the truth were genuinely ready, trusting that a delayed reveal is not the same as a withheld one. Show them, gently, the specific moments during their own day when anxious spiraling tends to begin most easily, quiet drives, late evenings, the minutes right before sleep, so they can meet those moments with intention rather than being caught by surprise each time. Give them practical tools for interrupting anxious spirals when they begin, redirecting their attention toward gratitude for what is currently true rather than fear for what might eventually prove false. Free them from constructing entire painful narratives in the space where real information has not yet arrived, understanding that fear left unchecked will almost always imagine a worse outcome than the one actually waiting to be revealed. Heal whatever fear has convinced them that this particular silence must be leading towards something painful. Remind them that Jacob's forced, deceptive path toward blessing cost him years of consequence, while Joseph's patient, honest path toward revelation produced reconciliation strong enough to sustain an entire family for generations afterward. Give them the same courage Joseph's brothers eventually needed simply to remain in the room once the truth was finally spoken, rather than fleeing from a moment that ultimately held far more mercy than they had prepared themselves to receive. Let them carry that same possibility with them into their own waiting. Refusing to assume judgment or rejection is the only reasonable outcome available to them. Give them the same grace Joseph's brothers eventually received, walking into a difficult moment expecting judgment and instead finding restoration, trusting that the same generous reversal remains fully available in their own unfolding story. Protect their mind from constructing worst-case endings in the space where honest answers have not yet arrived. Teach them instead to hold the unknown with open hands, trusting that what is coming may be far gentler, and far more transformative, than the fear currently filling that unanswered space. Give them the discernment to notice small, ongoing signs of continued care even within the silence, gestures, glances, small acts of consideration that suggest the relationship itself remains fully intact even while a specific truth is still being gathered. Help them recognize the difference between silence that signals genuine distance and silence that simply reflects careful, deliberate preparation, trusting that most silences carrying real love inside them eventually resolve toward connection rather than away from it. Give them fresh eyes for the specific ways love can look like silence while it is still gathering courage, the same way Joseph's careful testing of his brothers looked, from the outside, like coldness rather than the careful preparation it actually was. Restore their trust in the person they love, understanding that a season of silence does not automatically mean withdrawal or coldness. Sometimes it simply means courage still quietly gathering itself for a conversation that matters too much to rush. Give them small moments of genuine relief scattered throughout this waiting season, brief periods where the tension eases enough for them to remember that their life still holds real joy alongside this specific, unresolved question, joy that was never actually dependent on that question already being answered. Meet them in the specific, practical stress this waiting has added to their life, whether that stress shows up as difficulty sleeping, difficulty focusing at work, or simply a persistent low-grade tension that colors every other part of their day. Provide for whatever practical weight makes this particular waiting heavier than it needs to be, whether that is anxiety about a relationship, uncertainty about a future decision, or the quiet exhaustion of continuing to show up warmly while carrying an unanswered question. Let these reassurances arrive gently, in whatever form fits their own specific relationship, quiet confirmations that keep genuine hope alive through whatever remains of this particular waiting season. Give them signs, however small, that reassure them the silence they are experiencing carries genuine care underneath it, quiet confirmations that keep hope alive during whatever remains of this particular waiting season. Let them trust that whatever courage is currently being gathered on the other side of that silence is being gathered with genuine care, the same careful, deliberate courage Joseph gathered across multiple encounters before he finally allowed himself to be fully known. Give them breakthrough in the exact relationship where this silence has grown the loudest, and let them trust that the truth being prepared there is being prepared with real care, the same care Joseph carried into a room his brothers walked into terrified and walked out of restored. Give them the specific grace to close their eyes tonight without needing tonight to be the night every answer finally arrives, trusting that rest itself is available regardless of how much remains unresolved. Let them experience genuine rest tonight, not because every question has been answered, but because they have chosen to trust the character of the God who is already fully aware of what remains unspoken. Give them peace tonight that does not require the secret to already be spoken in order to feel real, a peace built on trusting that whatever is coming has been shaped by love, even during the silence that currently makes it hard to believe that fully. Let their own faith grow quieter and steadier rather than more anxious as this season continues, trusting the same unseen process that once carried Joseph's entire family safely toward reconciliation and provision, a process that never once required their own frantic effort to succeed. Give them a spirit of expectation rather than dread as this season of waiting continues, choosing to believe that whatever is being prepared for them carries genuine care, regardless of how uncertain the current silence still feels. Strengthen them spiritually in whatever remains of this season of waiting, so that when the reveal finally comes, they receive it the way Joseph's brothers eventually received their own, with relief, with restoration, and with a bond made stronger for having survived the uncertainty that came before it. If these words found the exact place in you that needed them tonight, let it be known, even if only to me, even if you never say it out loud to a single other person. Someone else you love is likely carrying their own version of this same quiet unease about someone close to them, quietly, without ever fully naming it to anyone, and they may need to hear tonight that the silence they have been sensing may be gathering itself towards something far better than the fear currently filling it. You have not been imagining the silence. You have been sensing something true finally gathering the courage it needs to become spoken, and I am telling you tonight that the moment is closer than you currently believe. Rest in this tonight, fully and completely. What is coming was never meant to break what you share. It is gathering itself to change everything, and to change it for good.